Welcome to Global Vid, a podcast about original productions and international TV and film distribution. I'm your host, Eric Y. Lapointe, and we're about to learn how people in our industry are expanding their footprint and finding the right partners around the world. This show was created by Now Global and is also available as an audio format on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast application. Welcome everybody, and welcome to this episode of Global Vid. I am your host, Eric Y. Lapointe, and a few weeks back, I got the chance to sit down with a brand new producer named Ernest White II, who just moved up here from the United States to Vancouver and launched a new production company called Presidio Pictures. And he got his start in original programming with a travel series called Fly Brother with Ernest White II. Let's dive in right now and listen to that conversation. So, Ernest, how are you? Welcome to today's show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Eric. I'm really happy to be here and excited to talk to your audience.
Great. Awesome. Well, let's first start off by introducing you. You're a producer, a storyteller, an explorer. You've got this great show that caught my eye and wanted me to invite you onto this podcast recording. But why don't you start by explaining a little bit about your background and what you do?
Sure. So the show that you just referred to is Fly Brother with Ernest White II. It's a television travel docu-series about friendship and connection around the world. And in it, I visit friends who bring me into their community, show me what they love about the place, and we show the audience the whole world is our tribe. And right now, season 1 of the series is in the United States, airing on public television stations and Create TV. Essentially, I am a former educator and journalist turned host and producer. So that's kind of a little bit about what I'm doing right now, at least on one side. And then I also am the CEO and founder of Presidio Pictures, which is a small film, television, and digital media studio that focuses on BIPOC, LGBTQ+, and over 60 narratives, which is kind of an expansion on what I'm doing with the television series already.
I'm just curious about the over 60 narratives. Can you elaborate more on that? That's the first time I've heard that.
Well, seniors, elders, you don't really see very many productions that center stories from that generation, from the boomers and even a little bit older, and certainly the leading edge of Generation X even. And so, that's a very large population in the world, and they also deserve to have their voices amplified as well. So
I mean, that's awesome, because I think that's the first time in a long time I've heard anybody say that they're creating content that will help aim at that audience. So that's great. Let's talk about your background in TV and entertainment. So part of what I'd love to do with this podcast is to first take a step back and learn how people got into the industry in the first place. I find that highly motivating. And as we get to talk about Fly Brother and a little bit later, Fly Brother is a great example of how people can create stuff from scratch. But let's start with you. Like, you're originally from Florida. You've zigzagged around the world in terms of traveling. I believe you've lived in a number of different cities and eventually moved to San Francisco. And now, most recently, during the 2020 pandemic, you made your way to Vancouver.
I did.
So please tell me about your story from the start. I'd love to hear it.
As I mentioned, I'm a former journalist and educator. Both of my parents were teachers. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, and I was always drawn to different cultures, different countries, languages, history, geography was my favorite subject in school. I would ask my parents for road atlases for my birthday. My dad was like, "You want 2?" Because it was only like $4.99. So it was always kind of in me to have an eye towards the world. And my parents stoked that. Again, being educators, they whatever that I could devour in that regard, they provided. They believed in stoking healthy obsessions, if you will. And I ended up, I would say also, one of the defining moments was when the wife of the preacher at my church. Now, I'm Southern, we all grow up in church, so it's a requirement. And she also was a teacher, and she ended up giving me a book called Free Stuff for Kids. And in that book, I had to have been maybe 6 or 7 years old, you could order all kinds of little trinkets and that kind of thing. But I actually was drawn to the section that had the addresses of all the tourism boards, the convention and visitors bureaus of different cities and regions, states and countries. And so you would just send off a postcard. And this is, of course, before the internet. They would send you back a packet of maps and brochures and pamphlets and view books and guides and just anything that you could possibly want if you were a geography nerd like me. And so I collected all that stuff. And eventually, one of the other things from my childhood that was, I guess, very impactful was growing up in Florida. We could go to Disney World easily and cheaply. Back then, I think the tickets were $21 for the Florida resident special. So,
Not
we're talking
anymore.
decades ago. And my favorite section of Disney World was not the Magic Kingdom. It was Epcot Center, because they had all the countries that you could go to and visit. And so that kind of always instilled in me, or just again, stoked those fires of discovery. And to see my parents, who grew up in the segregated South, to engage with people who didn't look like us, would have conversations, laugh and joke in line and for rides and that kind of thing. Like, I would always see them model for me how to be with other people and just, engage and with authenticity. That all set me on the path to traveling. And so did my first study abroad when I was 16 to Sweden, one of the cheapest countries that you could go to as a foreign exchange student, and the programs that they offered.
Are you being serious? I heard it's very expensive there.
So the country was expensive, but in terms of like these programs through YFU, Youth for Understanding, the two cheapest countries you could go to in that program were Sweden and Finland. If you wanted to go to France or Spain, not only did you have to have a language requirement for 3 years, but that program was like $1,500 more, probably because of the popularity. So I ended up in Sweden. And again, this was the 90s. So I don't, I was 16 years old. I don't know what what the prices were looking like. I stayed with a host family, but that was the door to the future for me when it came to travel. So got my, finished school, got my degree in political science and undergraduate. Then I moved to Washington, D.C. and got a graduate degree in creative writing. And around that time, I was thinking either foreign service or just teaching abroad, and decided not to go into the foreign service because I wasn't in agreement with the current presidential administration at the time, again, many moons ago. And so I ended up getting a teaching job in Colombia, South America, taught English and social sciences there for while I was writing, attempting to get my first novel published. The teaching was supposed to be my waiting tables, but had a close but no cigar moment with that book. Didn't really turn into anything, but I started a blog while I was living in Colombia called Fly Brother. And it was all about my travels. I would, and this is like maybe 2008. And so blogs were still, a big thing at the time. Instagram was not, didn't exist. So you still told stories with writing, not so much with photographs. And I talked about what it was like for me living abroad at the time in a country that people still had misconceptions about. And at the same time, I started telling people, how they could travel more cheaply, more easily, and that kind of thing. The travel sphere was very different at that time. There were not the big 3 Middle Eastern airlines offering $700 round trip tickets to Tanzania then. So people really did want to know like how you could kind of get around, and you had to happen upon information. And so I tried to offer a mix of narrative about my own personal life as an expat, as well as service information to help people just live a more adventurous life. After a few years, went from Colombia to Brazil, lived there as a journalist and an educator. And a buddy of mine from college was like, hey man, listen, you've got this great blog. It had had some traction. I had been featured in a few magazines, and I had even been chosen to participate as a talking head, like now, on a couple of Travel Channel shows. And he was like, listen, I think you're a great storyteller. You've got a lot of experience. We want to kind of develop a show with you. However, they didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have any money.
Okay.
And so I had to kind of leverage my connections as a journalist in the industry, as well as basically ask around, and raise the money by activating my network of people, my friends, and kind of enroll them in the possibility of what we were doing. And so that's kind of how the show was born. I had to figure out, okay, doing a travel show, I'm not really a foodie. I love architecture, but that's not really, widespread interest.
Yeah.
So what can I do that's unique in the space? And I thought about what was most authentic to me, and that was the friends and community that I would be building, that I had been building over the years as a traveler, leveraging the technology that we have to stay in contact with each other these days. And so that was the focus of the series. We started filming, and we ended up, that startup network that my friend worked for or co-owned went dark. They ran out of money while we were still filming season 1. And so then we were a cart without a horse for a hot second. And eventually, through, again, network of friends and connections, we were connected with public television, Northern California Public Media, and that is how the show eventually found its way to television.
Well, that's awesome. And I love the fact that you've revealed your true geography nerd self. That's something I didn't know about you, but of course I should have assumed that. But anyways, in my case, we're very similar. I grew up collecting maps, felt very nerdy about it. I had a friend who, like you, would write to each state trying to get a free license plate. Sometimes he'd get a letter back saying you have to pay $10. But I remember he was like so proud to get, some of the more beautiful and unique ones.
Sure.
And, as a grown up, I didn't pursue geography as a career or even studies. But as a grown up, I always had to map people out in a way. It was important for me to know where they were from and where they were going. And sometimes just like knowing who is who in an organization. Sometimes I ask the weirdest questions because of that. But it's because my mind is acting like a map and just trying to figure it out and visualize what's in front of me. So let's talk about Fly Brother. You have already started explaining how this show came to fruition, but why don't you tell me what the show is all about?
Well, as I mentioned, it's about friendship and connection. So in every episode, I go visit a friend who brings me into their community. They show me what they love about the place, and we show the audience the whole world is our tribe. So that's kind of the elevator pitch when I talk about it. We filmed season 1 in 11 different destinations. We ended up with 10 episodes, partially because in 2 of those places, we got our shoot got cut short because of weather issues, and in another place we just weren't on the ground long enough to get a full public television half hour, which is 26 minutes versus the 22 and a half minutes of a commercial series. Those kinds of things are the things that you have to learn when you're just coming into the industry without going through the industry. We filmed in places where I have friends already, having traveled to 70 countries, having lived in now 6 countries. And, when I say those numbers, it's not about impressing people. It's not about, oh, look at how many places I've been to. It's to encourage people to go to those places. If you've only been to one other country outside of your home country, that's amazing. If you've never been, but you have that strong desire to go and to learn, that's amazing too. So it's not like, oh, I've been to all these places, but I have been able to create a community that I'm still in contact with via WhatsApp and Facebook and email, and engaging with those people. It was a matter of figuring out what were some of my favorite places in the world, who were some of my best friends that also would be enjoyable on television. Because I have some really good friends that they even say like, I'm super boring. And I'm like, I don't think you're boring, but what would an audience say if we sat there again talking about Art Deco architecture? The thing is, in the Brazil episode, Sao Paulo, with my friend Flavia Lees, she makes talking about architecture fun. And so, it was figuring out like who'd be a great guest, who was available to film at the time that we were able to get there. My production team is based in Brazil, so it was a lot of coordinating schedules, working with destinations to sometimes be hosted by the destination in a particular place. Other times, again, having to pull together elements. We'd negotiate with a hotel, we'd negotiate with an airline. We had an airline partner, Norwegian. And so it's just, again, a series of conversations. and also backed by knowing your worth and knowing like the value of what you're doing. You're not always going to get a yes, but when you show up with the power of like, listen, I'm doing something amazing and impactful, it's not curing cancer, but it's making people smile and feeling loved, then, that lets me engage in conversations where I'm saying, hey, how about we collaborate and you infuse some money into this project so we can make the world better? That's kind of what you have to do. I know, you didn't necessarily ask this yet, but when you're trying to put together something unconventionally.
Let's talk a little bit more about, because you described it when we spoke at one point as bootstrapping it. And a
Yes.
lot of independent producers are doing that here in Vancouver, but all over the world. I'm working on a production right now as well. And what my partner and I always say is, let's make it happen. And we keep moving the project forward. But I'd love to hear about which first pieces came together and how did you do a Kickstarter program to start? Did you reach out to the sponsors first? Like, what were the first steps to actually making this project move forward ever so slowly? How long did the whole development process take? Maybe so many questions.
Whew. 3 years. I wouldn't say the development, it was being developed as it was being produced.
Okay.
We were not, it was not a situation of like, it's in development and then it's in production and then there's post-production. I didn't have that kind of structure, nor did I have the resources to be able to do it in that kind of industrial sense. We did it as we did it. We would go film when we could film. It would be a confluence of resources that came together that allowed us to do it. And early on, I had to come up with a couple of basic tenets of the project with regard to my own, how I was going to show up. Meaning, I knew that I had to just be okay with however I looked on camera. It didn't matter my feelings about it. What was on camera was on camera. If I got the take and I was able to, it was articulate, then that's what it was. I, couldn't be worried about the fact that my stomach looked fat or the shirt was, out of style or whatever. In doing so, kind of removed the yoke of perfection from me. And I think that's important when you start out, especially with an independent project, but in life in general. Everything is perfectly imperfect, and so having that attitude going in allowed me to not be saddled with having to do 100 takes because I didn't like necessarily the angle and all that kind of stuff. It was like, well, I was looking pretty pudgy in that episode, but you know what? Hey, as someone who's had a lifelong fitness and weight loss journey, because food is good. You have to be okay with those things. And then the other thing too was just being okay with whatever happened in the destination. If it was raining, it's raining, and we figure it out. Because when you go to a place, you don't have any control over the weather. Sure, we'd want to go to Stockholm in the middle of summer, or we would want to go to Cape Town, at a time where the days are crisp and sunny and you can see Table Mountain from miles away. Well, that's not what happened. We went, it was gloomy, cloudy, rainy. You couldn't see Table Mountain, but we still had a good time. We still found the things that one could do on those types of days. And that to me also allowed us the freedom to get things done the way.
It sounds like you had a great opportunity to find serendipitous moments on those trips. And what I really appreciate about the show is that it's not necessarily focusing on the destinations that you can go and see, but rather the people and the stories that are there. So that improv approach lended itself really well to that show, for sure.
Sure. I would call it loosely scripted. I wouldn't even call it semi-scripted.
Okay.
We would work, if we had support from the destination, we would work with the destination to figure out places that they would want to show and how we could work that organically into the story, as well as getting support from them to film in places that we wanted to go to, that I wanted to go to, that my friends wanted to go to. Because again, it is centered on experiences that I've had with people from there or with people who know the place intimately. And that kind of, again, there is that organic pulling together. It includes a lot of serendipity or, cosmic will, whatever you want to call it. But that's how life is. And that's why I feel like we finished up the season with something that was much more enjoyable and much more diverse and varied than we would have had if we had all the resources on the front end. We were able to go to every single place and everything, it would have looked beautiful and would have been boring because it would have been predictable.
Were you going to go to these places anyways?
Some of them were not on the initial list of places, and they ended up, kind of showing up because of circumstance. Every place in the world is some place that I would like to cover and be in and experience. And I will say, though, that having worked as a journalist in Sao Paulo, being the one of the editors of Time Out Sao Paulo magazine, that was an experience in a city that all kind of has a bad reputation in a lot of ways. People from outside of Brazil and even lots of Brazilians think that Sao Paulo's ugly and dirty and just too much. And I love that city. It's a place that I've always felt at home. It's exhilarating. You have to love cities to enjoy Sao Paulo. If you don't love cities, you'll hate it. But I do love cities. I love the fact that there's so much going on. I can't ever get to everything that's happening. The reason I'm saying that is because those of us who do love the place find the beauty in it and we extol that beauty. And that's one of the things we did with the show. I chose to go to Sao Paulo, not Rio, even though my production team is from Rio. It's not that we won't go to Rio. That's on our season 2 list. However, it was more important for me to open up the narrative to a place that could use a little bit of reputational rehabilitation, if you will. And I receive comments all the time from people saying, wow, I didn't know that was there. It looks interesting. I wouldn't go on my own, but I would go with you, or I would go with Flavia Lees or Pacheco, my friends in the episode. And so that's part of the work that I'm doing, is to kind of shift the narrative for a lot of places that people don't ordinarily think about.
So I'm just curious now, you've been in a lot of places. Did you say you lived in 6 countries, right?
I have lived in 6 countries.
How many languages have you picked up?
I speak 3 languages. I wouldn't say that I picked them up because I intentionally studied them. I'm saying that on purpose. Okay. I took years and classes. So I didn't just show up and all of a sudden, speak the language at all. I'm again, former professor. My parents were teachers. So I'm not very organized in a lot of ways, but when it comes to the acquisition of knowledge, I'm kind of old school like that.
Okay. So what are the 3?
English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And, native English speaker. I took Spanish from 9th grade in the US all the way through the rest of high school into college. Then I lived in Colombia. I did a study abroad in the Dominican Republic. And then after that, I moved to Brazil. But before going there, I had started already taking Portuguese lessons from a Brazilian buddy of mine in Bogota. So if anything, I was able to kind of shift a little bit from Spanish into Portuguese. 2 languages, it's frustrating because they're still 2 different languages, even if they have similarities.
Yeah.
And once you go there, I was supposed to retain my Spanish and add Portuguese, and that's not what happened. The Portuguese was like acid on my Spanish, and then it all just started mixing together. But my friends loved it, so.
I would imagine there's a lot of Brazilians that can understand Spanish because of their surroundings, but I might be wrong on that. So maybe you can get by.
You can get by. I think it's easier for Brazilians to read Spanish, but you do have, again, there's a lot of words that are similar, and I believe it's easier generally for a Portuguese speaker to understand Spanish than the other way around because of how the languages are structured and how Spanish follows along phonetically much more closely to the letters than Portuguese does. Portuguese is a little more like English or French, where you've got many different pronunciations for the vowels and that kind of thing. Whereas on the Spanish side, it's more like German, where most letters have just 1 sound or 2 max. The thing is, on the Portuguese side, though, a lot of people think they understand Spanish. And then I would speak to them in Spanish, and they would have no idea what I was talking about. So my personal experience in Brazil is, again, they're two different languages,
Sure.
related.
So what did your crew look like when you were going to these different countries? Did you bring somebody else on board, or did you hire locally? How did you figure out those logistics?
I never hired locally. I always brought the same team with me because I believed that, one, we have camaraderie, we enjoy working together, we have argued and fought on shoots and have made it through and love and respect each other. And, I do believe there's something to be said for the continuity of that, the language of the filming that's happening. My cameraman slash director, Pedro Serra, he's in Brazil, amazing guy. He's on the short side, so I always was worried about the camera aiming right at my stomach, but I got over it. And he's super cool, very chill, but he also like fluent English speaker. He used to teach English in Brazil, and that helps, because and also with my Portuguese, like we could really go back and forth, just ideating in both languages, and it helped a lot because he brought a unique eye. He was coming from working in Brazilian television, which is different than US television. And so we have kind of a look that I think is a little bit more jaunty and more colorful than you would get from a standard US production. The other thing, it was a small team, just me and him from most shoots. And then we would have third person, our a lady, Juliana, we love her. That was important to me to have a woman on the crew. And she would come and be our second camera or sound when the resources allowed us to have that. But working with one camera just meant taping a lot of things twice and from different angles and repeating the question and that kind of thing. So we made it work.
That's exactly the kind of stuff, the kind of hacks and tricks that can be used to put a show together. So how has the show done, and when was it officially launched, and how has it done so far on Create TV?
So the show was officially launched on public television May 1st of this year, so mid-pandemic.
Was that good timing for the show, considering it's a travel show during a pandemic?
Well, of course. It's a show about friendship and connection that happens to use travel as a framing device.
Yeah, but that too is super important during the pandemic. We were isolating ourselves and not traveling, and your show was offering the opposite.
It's offering the opportunity for people to travel and connect and learn and be inspired, and to say, you know what, as soon as I'm able, I want to go to some of these places, or I want to go someplace, even if it's not one of those places. I want friends, I want, connectivity and have amazing, unique experiences. And so that's what I feel like the show served to address, among other shows. And then also, the field was less crowded, to be honest. You had the great shutdown that in many ways is still going on, certainly on the US side, and certainly with independent productions. Larger productions are figuring it out. They're doing the workarounds. And of course, Canada is booming because of the ability to actually work here. That said, it happened at a time when it was necessary because we didn't have any control over the timing of the series. Originally, it was supposed to debut in August of 2017 on the Dream Network, which no longer exists. And so, it is what it is. It comes out when it comes out. When everything is in alignment, it happens. You can try to induce labor on a baby, but there's going to be effects of that. In our case, there was no inducing of labor. It debuted May 1st on, I believe, Minneapolis. The Twin Cities PBS affiliate was our first station, and then KQED in San Francisco. So if you know anything about public television, the local affiliates program the series for when when it's most ideal for them. So it becomes available in the network of public television stations at the same time, and then the stations will program it based on their local needs. And so we had a rack of cities pick it up in May, a slew of them in June, then more in July, all the way through August. And August 10th was when the series debuted on Create TV, which is one of PBS's cable channels, and that's national reach. That started out August 10th. They've since rolled the series, I believe, definitely 2 times, I believe a 3rd time. So apparently it's doing well, or maybe there's just nothing else to put in that slot. But I'd like to think that people are finding it interesting, diverting, at least one episode, even if they don't like the whole series. But
So, I mean, I only know a little bit about the PBS model, and I'm sure a lot of listeners do not as well. Can you explain, like, how did that first get started? Did you know you were going to be on Create TV by August and all these stations would pick it up? Did you have to do the sales yourselves, or was it somebody at PBS that was pitching it to the affiliates?
so there's a lot of things that are in there. One, as the producer and the host, I'm always having to sell and
Yeah.
on some level. With public television, you affiliate with what's called a presenting station. Mine is Northern California Public Media, which is based in the North Bay area of California, North San Francisco Bay Area.
Which is where you were living at the time.
Well, I was living in San Francisco, yes.
Okay.
However, it didn't have to, I could have gone with any of
Yeah.
the affiliates. It could have been, WTTW Chicago. It could have been, WHUT Washington, D.C. Again, you activate your network, you talk with people, you ask questions, you ask for referrals, you offer referrals to people. It's like you see what you can enroll people in. And in our case, we were able to really come together with Northern California Public Media in a way that was useful and enjoyable for everybody. And so the way the system works with public television is there are 3 distributors underneath the umbrella of public television. There's PBS itself, and they do, a lot of the big, Downton Abbey and some of those like one-off documentaries or limited series and that kind of thing. Then you've got American Public Television, which distributes the bulk of programming on public television. And then you've got NETA, which is a smaller distributor, and they're heavily focused on educational content, but they also do other shows. We ended up going with NETA. And to the audience, no one really knows the kind of back end.
Sure.
I don't want to say machinations because it's not anything insidious.
No, it's just the way the PBS system is made.
It's just the way the system, exactly.
Yeah.
Certainly. And so we went with NETA. With NETA, I also had to engage a woman, Miss Regina Eisenberg, phenomenal lady who had worked in the public television system for 50 years as what's called a station relations person. And she essentially did the marketing with the show, with all the programmers. The idea is not for the producer to talk to the programmer other than hi, at conferences. So she worked kind of as an agent, if you will, within the system to place the show.
Okay.
And then once she did that in advance of the debut, the thing is, because you had the series debut during the pandemic, and because public television has as its explicit mission to educate before entertain, there were lots of stations that had a lot of blocks of educational programming because schools were not physically in session. And so where the show may have been picked up by a station earlier on in the process, in normal times, it was delayed a bit because they didn't have a lot of time except maybe at 2 a.m. And we have been on at 2 a.m. in a few places. But if they're like, okay, we like the show, we want it to go on at 7 p.m. In order to have availability at 7 p.m., it might have had to wait until July. But this going in. And so the idea is you're constantly going to have rollouts with stations. It is challenging because you're trying to let people know how they can see the series, and folks, they know about it. We were getting great press coverage,
but
and they're like, oh, I just read about it in the New York Times. But that was in, I think, late April or early May. It didn't debut in New York until July.
There's no national consistency per se with the programming.
not until you get to Create TV, which is,
Yep.
as the cable network, it's nationally all at one time, and they air it 3 times on Mondays. So that said, that's a part of the process. And again, on the audience side, all they're seeing is the same PBS affiliate. So you'll see my show and you'll see the watermark that says PBS, but we're not officially a PBS show because PBS didn't distribute it.
Right.
That's why we say public television.
Can I also ask about the business model of PBS? Like, so for many people who are not American, they're probably not aware. How does that work? Like when Nita is reaching out to the individual affiliates, are they trying to get license fees or just simply airtime so that you can monetize with sponsors? How does the PBS model work?
Well, so you're asking something that's above my pay grade. I'm not sure that they have to negotiate airtime. They're within the network of content distributors. So they release a catalog of available programming and the programmers receive that catalog. They look at what's available. Then I have my station relations person to reach out to them, and I don't have to encourage her to do it. That's her job, and she knows who to reach out to. She's got these relationships that she's built, and she's like, hi, it's Regina. I'm representing Fly Brother with Ernest White II. As you can see, it's been listed as an available program through NITA, and I think it'd be a really great match for your market, blah, blah, blah. And she handles that. And so, the programmers are choosing from the 3 distributors that provide the content.
So I would like to conclude this by talking about the fact that just this year, you moved to Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and you started a new production company called Presidio. And why that choice? Why Canada? Why during a pandemic did you decide to move up north?
Canada, or Vancouver specifically, has always been one of my favorite cities to visit. It's gorgeous here, even when it's raining. It's green and lush. I just felt called to the place, and the opportunity presented itself when, again, things were kind of shutting down on the production side in the United States, particularly in California, because of the stringent measures and restrictions related to the pandemic. Not judging any of that, just looking at what was available and what we were allowed to do and what the opportunities were in other places. And so at the time, I was having conversations with friends, many of whom were leaving the United States to live abroad, which I had done for 10 years. And so I was thinking, it might be time to make that move. And in engaging with friends from Canada, I was connected with an immigration attorney. So I think it's important to know I did get help from an attorney, and we were considering the options that were available to me. And so we thought about expanding on what I was already doing, producing mostly. It's not that you can really expand into Canada as a host, but you can as a producer.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. We put together a packet where I essentially created a studio that is a startup, and basically engaged my network of people. We looked at the kinds of stories that we wanted to tell. Again, I have my master's degree in creative writing. I have novels that have not been published, but I've got a lot of stories that are both unscripted as well as scripted and long form, feature film, documentary film, scripted and unscripted television. We're looking at going into video game and VR experiences in the near future. And again, from the place of looking at intelligent, diverse stories that are also entertaining and empowering at the same time. If you look to Hollywood for that, you're getting things a few times a year. It's better than it used to be, but at the same time, I don't necessarily find all comedies to be enjoyable or representative, and so I wanted to do things that speak to my seriousness and my interests, and I know that other people have them. So the idea isn't to be the only game in town, but it's to be a damn good one. And so I basically, put together a business plan, pulled all the necessary documents that were required, set out for the border in a rented car. And I basically had to, rock up to the land border here at Peace Arch and enroll the immigration officer in the possibility of me coming into Canada to create a film studio that can create impact around the world to help people feel seen and empowered and loved. And again, Canada is where things are happening. The restrictions are not so much here now that you can't film. You have to film carefully. You have to, make sure you're socially distant and have all the PPE and insurance and all of these other things. So it's not a free for all, but it's not a complete shutdown like in the US. And so, the immigration officer essentially had to make a decision right there. He looked through the packet. I was probably there for about an hour while he assessed what I was planning to do. And he seemed to think that I was worthy of acceptance into the Great North. And so I'm here with the expressed goal of making this thing happen. And so there's been some traction. We've got a show in development right now that we'd like to film in Toronto in the summer. We've got some other projects coming down the pike, including season 2 of Fly Brother with Ernest White II, where
That's
as soon
awesome.
as we get the green light, we'll go to the Yukon to film. And I think probably by the time this gets aired, we will have already done that. But so, the idea is to come here and create projects and entertainment that is global in scope.
Yep.
But a place like Vancouver is one of those places that it provides fertile ground for global impact. And so I'm exceedingly happy to be here.
Do you see yourself sticking around Vancouver for a while?
Well, sure. I mean, right now the border's closed anyway, so it's not like
Well, when is it a long-term plan? Because you are a traveler. You're a world traveler, so I could expect you to start another company somewhere else at some point.
Yes, but one has to have a place to lay one's head, doesn't one?
Yes.
I've been watching The Crown, so but we've got our US base in San Francisco, which is only a couple of hours south of here by a plane. So I don't feel like Vancouver is so far outside of where things are happening. It's a hub, things are happening here.
Yeah, we're pretty close. I mean, when a 2.5 hour flight from LA and whatnot. And there's a ton of great people here. You did kind of move here in a weird year where it's probably harder to have networking meetings and not, but like you suggested, like easy walks outside, socially distanced, safe. That's one great way. And yes, it rains here a lot, but it seems like every day there's a moment of sunshine for a couple hours, and those hours are precious. And so those are probably the moments where you can grab somebody and go for a meeting. But this city has been really great to me as well. I mean, I moved here 3 years ago, and the networking and people opening their doors when I first got here was amazing. So I wish the same to you, and I wish you much success. Thanks a lot for spending your hour with me, and I look forward to speaking with you again very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks everyone for listening.
All right, take care. And that was this week's episode of Global Vid with my guest, Ernest White II. And thanks to Presidio Pictures as well as Nightwood for the theme song. Stay safe out there, and see you next time.